So, can you hear me? Yes. Can I see hands? Who hears me? Yes, good. You should come closer. Okay. First of all, I want to say really very, very warm welcome to everybody. It's nice to see such a big group here. Apparently, there are no microphones. It's not that we didn't ask for microphones. It was very well organized in the preparation. It doesn't mean that it is here now. So we have to improvise. I can also feel that it's very difficult to talk and to make sure that people in the back hear us. So help the presenters to come closer because we do as best as we can. So I want to first of all thank all of the organizers of this session, particularly the University of West London that organized this session together with the Trust Fund for Victims from the ICC, Tilburg University, Ghent University. So thank you all and thank you all for attending. This session is moderated by Cornelia Tobias. Cornelia is the editor and journalist of Africa Express. It's a wonderful, wonderful outlet for information really on anything what is happening in Africa. So we are very proud to have you, Cornelia, and very pleased that you moderate the session. And apologize again for the fact that there is no microphone. It's a conference about digitalization, but apparently it is still human communication that makes things flow. I would ask all of the speakers to really take this middle ground so that you really try and cover the sound. And thank you everyone for your understanding. And
Thank you very much.
please.
Welcome all to Harmony's house. And I'm truly honored to be here this afternoon. To be able to introduce and so many important guests who are active in the field and trying to improve quality of life of those who have suffered trauma and unimaginable violence. All of them need a lot of our attention. And think of to do what you can. So trauma needs help indeed. Every day, migrants, displaced people are constantly confronted with violences and mistreatment at home, before fleeing, during the journey, and very often in the host community or country. Both displaced and migrants are often unable to process and overcome by themselves the suffering and violences they have been suffered. But for sexual integration into the society, severity is absolutely necessary. It's essential for a good integration in the society. The ICC Trust Fund for Victims is helping people who were deported by the Lord's Resistance Army that killed over 100,000 people, and between 60 and 100,000 were kidnapped. 2.5 million were displaced in several African countries. The various activities are supported by the local authorities in Uganda, and the funding has been extended and guaranteed until 2024 by the ICC Trust Fund. ICC Trust Fund will not necessarily always be extended equally to migrants in Uganda and in other countries. The resources commitment is too high to be extended to all those who. Now let me introduce Selam Kidane, lecturer of University of London, Mrs. Kidane curriculum dish and cultural internet support to traumatized vulnerable communities. She is the developer of the short and effective intervention for post-traumatic stress called Trust. Dr. Kidane, please can you explain us shortly your low-cost self-program, trauma recovery understanding self-therapy called Trust, and already tasted in Uganda on the ladies victim of the Lord's resistant arm. And I know that you have had important experience also in Ethiopia, working with Eritrean refugees camps in Tigray, who had experienced terrible violence, rapes. How was the reaction and how was this modern therapy accepted?
Thank you for being here, everybody. It's an honor to be speaking on these subjects, but particularly to people who are really keen to hear this. Yeah, it's also an honor to speak about trust, the trauma support that we've managed to develop. So I am honored here. Trust is birthed from several realizations that we've had. The first thing that we realized was the level of trauma and traumatization entailed in each of these experiences. So, as we just heard, I am a lecturer at the University of West London, but I'm also a psychotherapist, a systemic psychotherapist who's been working for many years in London. And when we do trauma assessments, if somebody scores around 33 on the impact of event scale, we're saying, oh my gosh, this person needs to be referred to a specialist. This person needs an immediate assistance. This is high priority. All the exclamation marks. In the contexts in Uganda, in Tigray, when we were doing the impact of event scale, people were scoring in the high 60s and 70s. So you can imagine twice the level that we normally see, and we're alarmed about. So we realized that there was really serious levels of trauma. And then we realized that there in emergency contexts, even in well-resourced emergency contexts, mental health support is never prioritized. You get a lot of food assistance, you get healthcare if you're lucky, sometimes education, a lot of other things are prioritized, but never mental health. And that doesn't make sense because we do know about trauma and traumatization in those contexts, and we've been able to see what level of trauma there indeed is. So that didn't make sense. So something needed doing. But then we realized that even if it was prioritized, the world, not Tigray, not Uganda, the world doesn't have the number of suitably trained and qualified trauma specialists. And everybody can remember. I mean, I find that difficulties in London, I'm sure it's like that here. The world doesn't have enough trauma specialists. And then we realized, even if the world had enough trained trauma specialists, they will not have the language and the culture input. So you can see the level of trauma, the lack of specialism, and the cultural input. So that's the enormity of the problem. It's that problem that we want to tackle. And tackle is all we can do at this point. And so trust was born out of that. So a really specialist trauma input that that understands the culture in the minutest details. So if you call something, so using the very local languages, and then specifically tackling the most distressing experiences that people want to address. So there will still be a lot of work that needs doing either side of that trauma, but we were targeting and focusing on specific experiences and then delivering it through the most appropriate medium, so it has to be trusted. So it's called trust. That's not a coincidence, but that's a nice coincidence. Okay, it's called trust, and trust is short for trauma recovery, understanding, self-help therapy. So, but we also needed to literally build trust. So, the language is one, the culture, the understanding of the context. So, you needed to be able to understand what Ella did, the unbelievable things that happened, what the various abductions were like amongst Eritrean refugees in Tigray. So you needed to be able to say to people, I do believe you, I do know that this happened, and I do know what to do about it. So, but because we realized that we are not going to be able to deploy endless numbers of highly skilled people, what we did was use ICT. So in Uganda, it was podcasts by trusted, known personalities in the communities. So we trained them to prepare podcasts that would be taken to people, that would teach them how to self-administer self-help techniques that would enable them to stabilize and process trauma. In Tigray, we used videos that were shared via Bluetooth from phone to phone, and then the availability of people that could respond to people's questions via text. So that's what trust is. That was the first question, I think. And then the second question, I think I combined Eritrea and how was it accepted? It was, at first it was questioned, and then people were willing to give it a go because there's nothing else. There wasn't much else that people could access, so they accessed it, and then they. Some people found it very difficult because trauma processing is not an easy thing. Those of you who are psychotherapists would know that trauma processing is not an easy thing, so they found it difficult. But gradually, they found it very useful. People were able to sleep, people were able to eat better, and look forward to new and different relationships. So it was eventually accepted. Thank you.
Thank you to you. So, another guest, an important guest, is Professor Ilse Derwin. She's full professor of the Department of Social Work and Social Pedagogy at Ghent University, Belgium. Her main research topics concern the psychological well-being of affected children, young refugees and migrants, and accompanying refugee minors and victims of trafficking and sexual violence. She is director of the Center for the Social Study of Migrants and Refugees at Ghent University and co-director of the Center for Children in Vulnerable Situations. Professor Derwin illustrated in a recent academic article the serious problems of child migrants, many of them without parents. You mentioned a specific program for the underage active in some countries, including Italy and the Transit Country for Excellence League. Professor Derwin works with ICC Founders for Victims. How was your experience with digital technology? What was difficult about using the mobile?
Thank you so much, Cornelia. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, okay. Let me start with telling you a short story about Irene. Irene is a Ugandan woman. She's 40 years old. She lives in the north of Uganda. In long time ago, when there was still ongoing war in northern Uganda, she was, as a kid, living in that war for a long time. She lived in IDP camps, was confronted with lots of violence, was abducted also for a couple of months, not that long, but then she returned and she's doing quite well. She suffers from nightmares still. She has her 5 children, sometimes complicated to deal with it, but she's going on quite well. And then with our center, with the Center for Children in Vulnerable Situations, we do a sensitization in her community. We go and we explain how do you see mental health problems? How do you recognize them? And what can you do with it? So we explain our offer in psychological services. Then shyly after the session, she comes to our staffs and she explains that maybe she can also be helped with her nightmares, with other symptoms, because she is now suffering more. In the north of Uganda, close to the Sudanese border, we have the Karamojong, who is with lots of armed groups doing armed attacks, and she's suffering more now from her trauma from 20 years back. So she steps forward, and we decide to take her in a group therapy. So we go through different sessions with her in the group, and at the end, she did not speak at all. Through none of the sessions she spoke up. But then in the last session, she stand up and tells the entire community when we do the celebration session about her experiences and how she processed her trauma. Showing strongly that talking about trauma and experiences and daily living difficulties in a group, creating social support, creating connection is really important. So in 2020, when COVID hit also Uganda and strong lockdown was imposed, we had to change our offer. So normally with our local Ugandan staff, we go to the communities, we do a group therapy session, we do individual sessions, but of course all of that was restricted at that time. So we started to change our offer. We reoriented our radio programs to talk about COVID, and we try to get into connection with our clients through phones. So some of them have mobile phones, not all of them have mobile phones. You know, internet is not always working. There's no free internet like we connect to the Wi-Fi here. So it was really difficult for our clients, practically difficult. Not all of them have a phone. Not all of them are always connected to internet, or they do not put on the phone. They forget about the appointment. So we really tried to kind of rearrange our offer to do phone consultations, but in a way it was only trying to catch up with clients. So it's really difficult, not only practically, but also emotionally, to talk about your deepest emotion, your past trauma, your current challenges through a phone call. And the whole social support that we think in our offer with CCBS is so important is also, of course, not possible. You just talk one by one on a phone with someone, so it's really difficult to really recreate that social network and that social cohesion. Also for our staff, it was really challenging to deal with phone calls and to talk with clients if they express emotions. So it was really hard to do that, because also them, they did not have lots of privacy in their home. So they were sitting at home doing the phone calls, but also their families were walking around. Then the phone, they closed the phone and were just sitting there. They did not have colleagues to chat about the difficult consultations they had. So I think mobile phones can have the possibilities, but to do the kind of work that we do with CCBS in the north of Uganda, in Lira, in Kitgum, to really have deep conversations, one-to-one, or with groups, or with couples, or with families, it's really challenging to do it in this way. So I'm bringing in a bit of a different perspective, not so enthusiastic about mobile phones and the digital connection. I think they can work, but in certain contexts, like in Uganda, it might be different. And I keep it to that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we have seen sometimes treatment with the nuclear technology works, and sometimes no. Now I would ask Check Ford, associate legal officer within the Internal Criminal Court, Trust Fund for Victims, working mostly on reputation the cases of the prosecutors, especially in democratic countries. We will see, I think, a short video to explain his experience on the field. And after that, I would like to questions. So let us see first maybe one from Congo and the other one Central Republic of Africa, from Central Africa. Mbali.
I think we will need to promise people to send the video after, because I think the sound quality is just not sufficient to hear it. I would rather maybe give time to the speakers,
Okay.
and then anyone can come to me, ask, and we'll send the video to everyone who's here. I think that will work better.
Yeah. Mr. Ford, what do you think? Can the two programs work together or have to be separated? And will it be difficult for the victims having access to the new technology in Congo and Central Africa? Yes.
Thank you very much for the questions. So basically, I was supposed to intervene with this video, so I will try to walk you through the programs that we are implementing both in the DRC and in Central African Republic before being able to answer to the question. So, as you may know, the Trust Fund for Victims is an entity that has been created next to the International Criminal Court in order to implement reparative measures for victims of crimes falling under the jurisdiction of the court. The Trust Fund's mandate is to be implemented independently from a court-ordered reparation on one side, every time that there is a situation in which victims have suffered harm resulting from crimes falling under the jurisdiction of the court. But also on the other side, every time there is a court-ordered reparations by a specific trial chamber of the ICC. So, in the context of the DRC, the video that we were supposed to present relates to the Lubanga case, in which basically the trial chamber 2 of the International Criminal Court issued a reparation order to be implemented by the Trust Fund for Victims. A short summary of facts. Thomas Lubanga had been convicted by the ICC for having conscripted, enlisted, and actively used children under the age of 15 in the course of a conflict. The reparation order the reparation order that is being currently implemented by the Trust Fund for Victims is done in a way that provides for reparation at a community level, but also at the level of the individuals that have specifically suffered the harm. The program that is implemented for the victims that have specifically suffered the harm provides for socio-economic support, psychological support, and physical support. For the psychological support in particular, one of the two main challenges that we are facing currently is that the security situation has worsened, making it harder for the implementing partner to meet the victims face to face and provide them with the psychological support needed. One of the other challenges that we are also facing is that the crimes have occurred 20 years ago, and that victims had found by themselves ways to cope by burying deep all the psychological trauma that was accumulated. So basically, we have found ourselves in a situation in which we were not able, after having reached out to the victims and started with the trauma treatment, we have found ourselves in a situation in which we were not able anymore to communicate with them in relation to those therapies. So we have, in the context of the program, a cell phone was distributed to each victim first, to ensure that we still keep in touch with them, considering that the security situation did push them to be on the move constantly. And in parallel to that, our psychologist did set up a line, a 24/7 phone line, that the victims could call at any time, basically, in case they were experiencing some difficult moments. So this has allowed actually addressing well, episodes that some victims were experiencing, but also in the interim for victims that were located in areas where it was impossible to meet them, to provide them interim therapy, waiting for the possibility to meet them again. So, answering to the first question, I would say that treatment of trauma on mobile phone can be actually complementary if used as an interim solution in case of emergency, wherever there is basic infrastructure allowing for it. In DRC, in Eastern DRC in particular, the network is not good everywhere. So even if there is a phone, yeah, it still needs to work for us to be able to be in contact and proceed with the activities. And even if it does work, in particular, one of the elements that were raised in the video that was supposed to be shown is that there is still a need first for a relationship of trust to be built with the individual before being able to speak to them without seeing them, and second, that it comes with a risk, with a high risk for the psychologist that is not able to read the physical language of the victim. So yes, that would be the answer when it comes to Eastern DRC. It is a viable solution if used in interim and in case of emergency, but it cannot be the way in Eastern DRC to proceed to a full trauma treatment. In Central African Republic, it has been a bit more, even more complicated than in the DRC, in the absence of all this basic infrastructure that is needed to be able to entertain a phone call. Because of that, I would say that in that specific context, that we wanted to put in contrast with Eastern DRC, it has not been possible to proceed even in interim for urgent situations this way. Also because the nature of some of the activities do not allow for an intervention via mobile phone. For instance, some of the sessions that were organized were simply, at the community level, I forgot the name. Laughter sessions. So basically, at a community-wide, the idea was just to discuss and, just basically through laughing, basically addressing basically some of the harm. Yeah, exactly. So that, for instance, would be quite complicated to organize with a cell phone when you are lacking the basic infrastructure. So anyway.
Thank you very much.
The video actually could not be but apparently Clara would share it.
We could try it, but I think it would be better maybe to continue with the
I think we continue and eventually we'll share it.
we haven't tested it, yeah.
So I apologize that Dr. Primrose they cannot attend the meeting today. So I will divide a bit the questions that I prepared for between Dr. Salam and Dr. Foy. But let us start with Dr. Fori, please. Dr. Fori is a young psychiatrist from Uganda. And he's just pursuing his doctoral studies in monitoring mental health with a particular focus on trauma and its management in local context using available ICT resources. He's also lecturer at Kampala International University, attention for research and applicability by way of evidence-based practice. Dr. Ford, you are psychiatrist. Please, can you tell us about your experience with the new program? Are there areas for development that foresee? How is the new program accepted in the community? It's difficult to explain the new. Let's start with this.
I do hope you can hear me all. I'll try as much as possible to be as loud as I can, given the fact that we are from the area where I rarely have the microphones. So I'm very glad to be here. And one thing that I actually did realize was whenever we have a new kind of thing being brought into, let me say, a given community, we need the individuals who are supposed to be using it to actually realize that this is their own. So meaning that they actually have to play a role in the very beginning, how it will be brought about, how it will be used, and then how we shall be able to make sure that as the time proceeds, they'll actually be able to own it. Okay, so I'm so glad that I was part of this new program, which was bringing up a brief tool, which was meant to be helping individuals who have been through trauma, who have been able to experience significant levels of stress. And the beauty about it is that it's a DIY, meaning that you can actually do it yourself. But before we move there, you need to first actually learn how to do it yourself. And that's where the team, which was developing this entire tool, and which was it was like they were able to bring it out and put it on board, and with the feedback that we've been able to have, I think it's good at the moment. So when I moved back to what she was trying to find out from me, one thing that we need to know is that the world is becoming a global village, and the thing that has helped us to reach those levels is the fact that information technology is spreading out, and this has helped to bring humans together. All right, so we can use that to bring out any program that we find is actually helpful, and hopefully the individuals will realize the benefits. So we are involved in a project at the moment, and it's supposed to lead to my PhD. And the project is looking at the trust tool. And the way we're thinking about it is we could easily be able to go into the community and would have to talk to them and see how we can use this to help them. But we need their input. Without that, the entire thing is doomed to fail from the very beginning. So, with all this, our hopes are that once we train them, then we will have peer trainers. And the beauty about the tool is that it's so simplistic that you don't need any complex, like knowledge, any complex skills. Anyone can actually use it at any time for any stress. no matter how severe or how mild it may be. And then that's when the issue of the smartphones has to come into play. Meaning that you, after you've been able to go through the entire training, which again, I'm going to put this point across, it's a basic training. Maximum can go for around like 6 weeks. So once you're done with that, then you can easily use the phone to help any other one who may be either in need of it or who may want to help the others. So at the very end of the project, we hopefully believe that the communities that will be involved in this will actually have a tool that they can be able to continue using generation after generation. I hope I've been able to.
Very good. Something, because you are working in the field with Dr. Fori and Dr. Primrose. Would you like to add some things?
Yes, nice. Okay. For this part, because I'm really using Primrose's shoes, I'm going to be a bit like her. It's an impossible task. So those of you who know her, don't tell her that I impersonated her very badly. But I'm going to try and I'm going to do a bit of a Primrose magic. Those of you who haven't had an opportunity to listen to her, please find her somewhere and listen to her. So Primrose would tell you a story similar to what you did, and she's got a lot of experiences, but I'm only going to use Mary's story. So Mary is a woman, I would say in her late 30s, but maybe, you never know. We Africans have got this magical age. You can never tell how old we are. But she's a very pretty woman, very, very tall. And when I first met her, she was quite grey. She was very tall. She was very thin because when she was abducted by the LRA, she contracted HIV, and so she was very thin, very grey, but she had this magical voice, and she would engage you in a conversation for so long. She was a lovely woman, and then she was introduced to this trust. So the first thing that she learned was that she was not mad that she hears these voices, that she was not bewitched, that she can't focus, and she was that she cannot be, that she hasn't got appetite. She realized that was trauma, and then she realized that was her brain working during those stressful and traumatizing events, her brain working hard to get her out of the situation, trying to save her. So that was a bit of like, whoa, like, you mean I'm not, I can be freed from this? You mean this works? And we said, yeah, we you know, your brain can do the rest. Once we get your brain to become Mary's brain again, not the emergency brain, then you would be able to live life like everybody else, basically. And so she was really committed to it. And then the next few sessions were about how to equip her to do this thing. She was very keen because she really didn't want to live the rest of her life not being able to eat, not being able to sleep or concentrate, and being angry all the time at children, the rest of the family, even the goats. So she needed to be free of this anger. And so the next session was about breathing techniques. Creating a safety for herself when it gets distressing. So these are skills, basic grounding skills, we call it in our fancy clinics. But out there, it's something that you can do in the morning when you wake up. Do 6 rounds of your breathing, and then you can get on with life. And she was happy she was doing that. And then came the trauma processing. That was so. Trust has got. The major bulk of it is the 2 sessions of trauma processing, introducing people to trauma processing. Of course, they would go on to do it, and we base that on EMDR techniques, I'm not going to go into the details of this, the therapy, but it's basically a technique that works by bilateral stimulation that is supposed to jog your brain into processing those traumatic memories that she has been suffering with, similar to your lady that introduced us for so many years. And a lot of it was being triggered, re-triggered, and re-triggered. And so she was able to process some of those memories. I don't know which one. She never told us, and we never make a point of asking which memory did you process. But my aha moment, my celebration, my key moment was when I went back few weeks. I didn't do the training of Mary. It was Primrose and her coaches, but the first part I was there for the first part of telling her that she can get rid of this distressing memories. So the next time I was there to do evaluation, so several weeks later, somebody comes up to me and she goes, "Oh, hi, Salam," and I was blank. Like I know the voice, I don't know the face. And then she goes, "It's Mary," and I was like, "Oh my gosh, Mary, what have you done to yourself?" And then the thing that struck me was the fact that she had put on weight. So this tall woman wouldn't have been a stranger on a catwalk somewhere, literally, because she was quite tall to start off with, and she had put on weight. And for her, what has changed is the fact that she had appetite now. And that for me was a great big success. So when we talk about trauma processing, I'm not talking about miracles. I'm not talking about somebody suddenly being free of everything, but I trust the human brain to do the rest gradually as well. And is it plan? Rose would have said plan. If I can say one thing about the mobile phone, we don't just use the mobile phone to counsel people. What we've used it in Uganda is to have the podcasts on. So even the simple phones can have, even though those Nokia ones, you can use the voices that are already recorded on that to listen to remind you how to do your breathing, to remind you how the bilateral stimulation works and things like that. And in Ethiopia, we didn't even need connectivity because it was done via apps that use Bluetooth. So it was videos recorded, 10-minute videos, several of them that were recorded, pre-recorded, and they were being transferred from phone to phone via Bluetooth. So it didn't even need connectivity. So when we talk about mobile phone, we don't mean for phone calls. So it doesn't necessarily need connectivity. Connectivity would be very good, and it doesn't necessarily need somebody at the other end live would be very good as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now a special guest who works in South Sudan, one of the charity place in the village. I'm aware since 2013 too. Pauline Magari works with the American Friends Service Committee as a Quaker International representative, Africa in charge of policy advocacy in the region. She contributes to peace building, policy advocacy, research and development in the Africa region. Mrs. Pauline is working indeed in South Sudan with victims of conflict, addressing secondary trauma, healing of the healers in the communities, and internationally displaced camps. We know you're using digital communication to reach the communities. Can you tell us your experience? How was it accepted by the victims in the community? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope I can be able to project myself. I'm Pauline Kamau. I work with the American Friends Service Committee. And we are partners with the IPA. So basically our work has been South Sudan because of the continuous conflict there, and also Somalia. In Somalia, we work with the refugees at the Dadaab camp in Kenya, working with women who have been sexually affected on the move. So we normally counsel them, and we offer them legal service because of the movement from Somalia to Kenya. they need that legal service, especially when coming to Kenya. Sometimes they are taken back, and as a refugee, you are not supposed to do that. So we offer them that kind of support. But my talk today is about South Sudan. What we have been doing in South Sudan is healing the healer. That is, we do not address primary trauma. We address secondary trauma. That is after realizing that even those ones who are counseling, the traumatized people, they are already traumatized. So they project their trauma on the people. So we started looking at how we can work with them. And lucky enough, we did get some religious organizations, because they are the ones who are working in South Sudan. We were able to work with the community counselors, whom we built their capacity to be able to reach the community on the ground. So what we normally do is that we take them for therapy, group therapy, individual therapy, and then they are able also now to, to go to the community. But during COVID, South Sudan, you could not go there. During conflict, you cannot travel in South Sudan. Sometimes you can be there, then, tension starts building. So what do? So what we agreed to do was to start this digital communication. And it is just a WhatsApp, group which we formed. It's not enough, but we said we can form that. Then we do radio listening to the communities where they go and do. And we are actually now starting awareness of trauma within the communities in South Sudan. And also one thing we are also trying to do is talking to the Africa Union, talking to the Intergovernmental Authority and Development to make sure they mainstream trauma in the peace agreement, because you cannot have a peace agreement, then you are not addressing trauma. Exactly what are you doing? And in South Sudan, you can be walking, and if you walk in front of somebody, it can just hit you or do anything because of that trauma. So we've been trying to do that. And during this time, during COVID, they could not travel. So we could gather the people in a room. We talk with them through digital communication, this internet. Then from there, they are able to go to their community. And one thing in Africa is that sometimes, like, I wouldn't go to the community because I don't speak their language. And when you go there, you look like somebody a spy. So you have got to use their own people to be able to do, trauma counseling, which is not easy. And of course, the continuous, South Sudan is not connected. You talk about countries which are not connected by internet. That is one country. Electricity, not available. Infrastructure, not available. So for us, one of the things we are saying is that, can we help build up infrastructure so that they can be able to communicate? Lucky enough, there has not been shutdowns of internet in South Sudan. It's only that it's not available. And of course, where it's available is very expensive. To get a bundle before we finish a conversation, they have to run looking for, we call them bundles, so that you can put in your phone and you are able to communicate. And don't forget that the handsets are not Android, they are the old ones. So sometimes it's really difficult to work with them. I want to stop there, but I can talk continuously talk
Sure.
about the work we have been doing in South Sudan. It is interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to attend this short meeting with so many guests, and it should be a moment of reflection. How can we do better in the future? How can we